What is the biggest lie of this century? Story 1. You agree to the terms and conditions might be one of the most casually dystopian sentences ever normalized. No one reads them. No one can realistically understand them. They're written in dense legal language designed to protect the company, not inform the user. And yet clicking agree binds you to rules that can shape your data rights, privacy, liability, arbitration, even your ability to sue. What makes it unsettling is the illusion of consent. It's framed as a choice, but it isn't. If you want to use the service, the app, the platform, the device, you accept. There's no negotiation, no summary of real-world consequences, just a scroll box and a button. Consent without comprehension isn't really consent. It's compliance. Buried inside those documents can be permissions to collect behavioral data, track location, share information with third parties, change policies later without direct notice, or force disputes into private arbitration. Most people don't even know what they've technically agreed to. It's the modern social contract, but one-sided, automated, and frictionless. We traded the inconvenience of reading contracts for the convenience of instant access. And in doing so, we quietly handed over leverage, privacy, and recourse in exchange for speed. The scariest part isn't what's in any single agreement. It's that we've normalized signing binding legal documents daily without thinking twice, because not clicking agree effectively means opting out of modern life. Story 2. We're all in this together. That might be the cleanest lie of the century. It sounds good in speeches. It trends during crises. It gets printed on posters and hashtags when things go wrong. Pandemics, recessions, climate disasters, wars. Suddenly, we're one big human family. Except, we're not. When the system shakes, the exits aren't evenly distributed. Some people lose jobs, others buy the dip. Some ration groceries, others charter jets and relocate. The same storm hits everyone, but some are in lifeboats and others are clinging to debris. The phrase only works if sacrifice is shared, but it rarely is. Policies protect markets before people. Bailouts flow upward, costs trickle down. Unity becomes a marketing tool to keep everyone calm while power rearranges itself behind closed doors. The harsh truth isn't that solidarity is fake. It's that solidarity is temporary and often performative. In reality, incentives reward self-preservation. Wealth insulates. Influence shields. And when pressure rises high enough, the myth cracks. We're all in this together was never a description. It was a request for compliance. And the people who needed it most were usually the ones least protected by it. Story 3. AI will give everyone UBI. The story goes like this. Automation replaces jobs, productivity explodes, wealth becomes abundant, and governments redistribute it through universal basic income. No one has to work unless they want to. AI does the heavy lifting. Humanity gets freedom. Sounds clean. Logical even. But here's the part no one likes to say out loud. Productivity gains don't automatically become public benefit. They become profit. And profit concentrates. Every major technological leap in history made society richer, and inequality sharper. Unless something forced redistribution, AI won't magically rewrite incentives. If anything, it centralizes power. Models are expensive, infrastructure is expensive, data is controlled by corporations. If automation replaces labor, the leverage shifts upward, not outward. Story 4. Get a university degree and you've got it made. That one shaped an entire generation. For decades, the formula was simple. Study hard, go to college, graduate, and the doors open. Stability, career, house, security. It was sold as the safest bet in an uncertain world. But the world changed and the slogan didn't. Tuition exploded. Student debt became normal. Degrees multiplied while entry-level jobs demanded experience that no one could get without already having the job. Entire industries automated or outsourced. And suddenly, having a degree wasn't a golden ticket. It was the bare minimum to compete for work that barely covers the loans it required. The cruel part is that the advice wasn't malicious. It was outdated. It worked for the people giving it. It stopped working for the people receiving it. Now a degree can still help. It can open doors. But it's no longer a guarantee of anything except cost. The lie wasn't that education matters. The lie was that the system would reward everyone who followed the rules. Plenty did, and still found out the promise had fine print no one mentioned. Story 5. That the government has our best interests at heart. That's one of the most comforting lies ever told. It's easier to believe the people in charge are fundamentally trying to protect you, that decisions are made with the public good as the North Star, that mistakes are just that, mistakes. But governments don't have hearts, they have incentives. Stability, power, economic growth, re-election, control. When those align with the public, things work. When they don't, the public becomes negotiable. Policies that hurt people aren't usually accidents, they're trade-offs. Someone calculated the damage and decided it was acceptable. Wars justified as necessary. Surveillance framed as safety. Bailouts prioritized over households. The machine protects itself first. Always. That doesn't mean every public servant is evil. It means institutions are designed to preserve themselves before they preserve you. The comforting version says you're being looked after. The realistic version says you're being managed. And once you see that difference, you stop asking whether decisions are kind and start asking who they actually benefit. Story 6. The arc of the moral universe bends toward justice. That's the inspirational version. The quieter truth is that it bends toward power. History doesn't naturally correct itself. It doesn't self-heal. It doesn't drift toward fairness out of cosmic goodwill. It moves wherever pressure pushes it. Sometimes that pressure is people demanding rights. Sometimes it's war. Sometimes it's economic collapse. Sometimes it's simple exhaustion. Justice doesn't arrive because time passes. Plenty of injustice has lasted centuries. Some still do. Progress only shows up when someone pays for it, with effort, reputation, safety, sometimes blood. And even then, gains can reverse. Rights can erode. Narratives can flip. The comforting lie is that history is on our side. The uncomfortable truth is that history has no side. If justice happens, it's because people forced it into existence. If it doesn't, time won't rescue us. The arc doesn't bend by default. It resists. And if no one is pulling, it settles back toward whoever already holds the most leverage. Hope is powerful, but hope without pressure is just a slogan. Story 7. America is a free country, usually, until speech threatens power or costs you your livelihood. Free to vote? Yes, but only within the boundaries of two parties funded by the same donors. Free to succeed? Maybe, if you can afford healthcare, education, housing, and survive one major emergency without falling into debt. Freedom here often means choice between options that were pre-selected for you. You can choose your job, but you need one to survive. You can refuse medical treatment, but you'll still get the bill. You can say what you want online, but platforms and employers decide the consequences. It's not a prison state, it's something subtler. Economic dependence replaces chains. Surveillance replaces suspicion. Debt replaces physical restraint. You're technically free, but your margin for deviation is narrow. The lie isn't that there's no freedom. It's that freedom is equal, abundant, and unconditional. For some, it's vast. For others, it's conditional on income, zip code, and how disruptive you are to the system. Freedom exists, just not evenly. Story 8. That welfare improves well-being. It can do that, and in a lot of cases, it genuinely does. I'm not anti-safety net at all. I think it's necessary in any functioning society. But the way it's structured matters, and that's where things get complicated. In theory, welfare is supposed to stabilize people so they can rebuild. In practice, a lot of programs feel like they're designed to manage poverty rather than reduce it. You get just enough support to avoid disaster, but not always enough security to meaningfully move forward. And then there's the benefits cliff. People act like it's a myth, but it's real. You earn a bit more and suddenly lose support that was worth more than the raise. That doesn't encourage growth. It encourages playing it safe. Not because people lack ambition, but because the system punishes risk at the margins. I believe in the idea behind welfare. I just get frustrated watching it function as a pressure valve instead of a launch pad. It keeps people afloat, which is important. But well-being requires more than crisis management. It requires stability you don't have to constantly re-qualify for. Story 9. That technology is here to better mankind. It could be used for that, and honestly, that's what a lot of us hoped for. I'm a technologist at heart. I love what innovation makes possible. The idea of tools that expand knowledge, automate drudgery, connect people across the planet, that's powerful. But we're also watching how it's actually playing out in real time. Instead of prioritizing public good, a lot of cutting-edge tech gets funneled straight into ad optimization, behavioral tracking, engagement loops, and market dominance. The incentives aren't aligned with human flourishing, they're aligned with quarterly returns. Surveillance becomes a feature, addiction becomes a metric. Engagement quietly replaces well-being, and it's not that the technology itself is evil. It's neutral. It reflects the motives of the people funding and deploying it. The same AI that could accelerate medical research can also automate misinformation at scale. The same data tools that could optimize cities can also profile citizens. That's the part that stings, because the potential is still there. The capacity to genuinely improve lives hasn't disappeared. It's just competing with profit, power, and control. And those forces tend to win unless deliberately restrained. I'm not anti-tech. I'm anti-watching something with massive promise get narrowed into a tool for leverage. Technology could elevate humanity. Right now, a lot of it is optimizing extraction. Story 10. That trickle-down economics creates prosperity for everyone. It could work that way in theory. The idea is simple enough. Lower taxes and fewer regulations for businesses and the wealthy, they invest more, expand more, hire more, and the benefits trickle down to workers. On paper, it sounds efficient, incentivize the top, and growth follows. But in practice, we've watched how it plays out. A lot of the gains don't trickle, they accumulate. Corporations post record profits, stock buybacks surge, executive compensation skyrockets, and wages barely move. Investment often flows into financial markets rather than payroll expansion. Shareholders win, workers wait. The assumption is that prosperity naturally distributes itself if you free up capital at the top. But capital doesn't have a moral instinct. It goes where returns are highest, not where need is greatest. If automation is cheaper than hiring, that's where the money goes. If offshore labor increases margins, that's where it flows. I'm not against economic growth. I'm against pretending growth automatically equals shared prosperity. In theory, rising tides lift all boats. In reality, some boats are yachts, and some are barely floating. Story 11. With insurance, you are protected. It can work that way. That's the promise. Right? You pay consistently now, so that if something goes wrong later, you're covered. It's supposed to convert uncertainty into security. And sometimes, it absolutely does. Accidents happen, disasters strike, medical emergencies come out of nowhere, and insurance can prevent one bad day from becoming financial ruin. That's the real value. But the protection isn't unconditional. It depends on what's covered. It depends on deductibles, exclusions, network restrictions, claim approvals, policy language most people never fully read. You're protected as long as the event fits the definition, as long as the paperwork is filed correctly, as long as the company agrees. There's also the psychological layer. You feel safe because you're insured, but many people only discover the gaps when they actually need help. Coverage caps, denied claims, out-of-network surprises, technicalities that turn security into negotiation. Insurance doesn't eliminate risk, it redistributes it, prices it, and manages it. And like any business, it's designed to balance payouts against profit. I'm not saying insurance is useless. For many people, it's essential. But protected doesn't always mean immune. It often just means the damage might be limited, if the fine print allows it. Story 12. That you can retire off of a 401k. It can happen. Plenty of people have done it. Contribute consistently, invest wisely, let compound interest do its thing for 30 to 40 years. That's the blueprint. On paper, it's elegant. You defer income now, the market grows over time, and in the future, you live off the gains. Personal responsibility meets long-term investing. But that assumes a lot of stability. It assumes you can afford to contribute regularly. It assumes your job offers a match and that you stay employed long enough to vest. It assumes you won't need to tap it early for an emergency. It assumes the market cooperates when you're close to retirement instead of crashing at the worst possible moment. And then there's inflation, healthcare costs, longevity risk. A 401k doesn't come with guarantees, it comes with projections. The number on the screen feels solid, until you realize it's tied to market performance and withdrawal strategy. I'm not anti-401k. It's one of the best tools available for retirement saving in the US. But we've quietly shifted from pensions, shared, employer-backed security, to individualized market exposure. You can retire off a 401k, but you're betting your future on decades of consistency in market growth, and not everyone gets that runway. Worry 13, I'll do it tomorrow. The most dangerous lie a human can tell themselves. It feels harmless. It even feels responsible sometimes, like you're just reorganizing your energy, giving yourself space. But tomorrow is a mythical land where all my productivity lives. Tomorrow's when I wake up motivated. Tomorrow's where I'm disciplined, clear-headed, not tired, not distracted. Tomorrow is where I suddenly become the version of myself that executes instead of hesitates. The problem is that tomorrow is always perfectly optimized, because it doesn't exist yet. Today has friction. Today has uncertainty. Today requires starting before I feel ready. Tomorrow in my head is smooth, focused, efficient, no resistance. It's the fantasy of action without discomfort. And every time I push something forward, I'm not really postponing the task. I'm postponing the identity shift required to do it. Because I'll do it tomorrow usually means I don't want to feel the difficulty right now. It's subtle. It doesn't sound destructive. It sounds patient, measured. But small delays compound just like small actions do. Tomorrow doesn't hold my productivity. It holds my excuses, politely rescheduled. Story 14. America is the land of opportunity. It can be. There are real stories of people starting with very little and building something meaningful. The scale of the economy, the access to capital, the culture around ambition, those things are real. But opportunity isn't evenly distributed. Where you're born matters. Your zip code shapes your schools. Your schools shape your network. Your network shapes your options. Two people can work equally hard and start from completely different launching pads. The narrative focuses on outliers, the success stories that prove it's possible. And it is possible. But possible and probable are not the same thing. Healthcare tied to employment adds risk to entrepreneurship. Student debt delays wealth building. Housing costs lock people out of appreciating assets. Mobility exists, but it's often more vertical for those who already have stability. I'm not saying opportunity is fake. I'm saying it's conditional. For some, the runway is long and well lit. For others, it's short and full of obstacles. America offers opportunity. It just doesn't hand out equal starting positions. Story 15. That social media shows real, unfiltered life. It can show moments that feel raw, people crying on camera, talking about failure, sharing vulnerability in ways that weren't possible before. But it's still curated. Even the messy posts are selected, framed, uploaded with intent. You're seeing what someone decided was worth showing. You're not seeing the drafts, the breakdowns that weren't filmed, the arguments that happened off camera, the 23 takes before the authentic one. And the platforms themselves shape what feels real. Algorithms reward engagement, and strong emotion performs better than nuance. So content subtly shifts, not necessarily fake, but optimized. Sharper opinions, cleaner aesthetics, more extreme takes. It creates this strange illusion. Constant access to other people's lives, but only the highlight reel or the strategically vulnerable version. I'm not antisocial. It connects people. It creates communities. It gives voices to people who wouldn't have had platforms before. But unfiltered is a marketing term. What we're mostly seeing is life edited for impact. Story 16, that we will own nothing and be happy. It could be framed as convenience, access over ownership, subscription everything, fewer maintenance headaches, no long-term commitments. On the surface, it sounds streamlined, but when you look at how it's unfolding, it feels less philosophical and more structural. Ownership used to mean control. If you owned your home, your car, your tools, they were yours. No monthly permission required. Now more of life is rented. Software is licensed. The media is streamed. Housing is increasingly concentrated under large investment firms. Even vehicles are experimenting with subscriptions. Access feels flexible until access can be revoked. And here's where people get uneasy. When assets concentrate at the top, while the majority shift into perpetual payments. If billionaires and massive funds own the infrastructure, housing, platforms, supply chains, and everyone else rents access, the power imbalance grows quietly but significantly. It's not that minimalism is bad. Plenty of people genuinely prefer fewer possessions. But there's a difference between choosing not to own and being priced out of ownership entirely. Happiness isn't the issue. Control is. Because when you own nothing by choice, that's freedom. When you own nothing because everything is consolidated upward, that's dependency rebranded as convenience. Story 17. We value your privacy. It sounds reassuring. It's always framed in calm, neutral language, like a company gently placing a blanket over your personal data. Then you scroll down and see the 47 trackers and a cookie pop up the size of your screen. Technically, they're not lying. They do value your privacy. It's valuable. It's monetizable. It's auctioned in milliseconds to advertisers who want to know what you clicked, hovered over, almost bought, thought about at 2 a.m. The cookie banner is presented as consent, but it's really friction engineering. Accept all is bright and easy. Manage preferences is hidden behind 5 layers of toggles, each defaulted to on. You can opt out if you're patient enough to decode it. And the privacy policies? 20 pages of legal insulation written in a dialect no normal person speaks. I'm not naive about how the internet works. Ads fund platforms. Data powers personalization. But let's not pretend the relationship is transparent. The entire system is built on behavioral surveillance wrapped in compliance language. We value your privacy has become less of a promise and more of a disclaimer. They don't want to protect your data from being used. They want to protect themselves while they use it. Story 18. The food pyramid shows us how to eat healthy. It was presented that way. Clean graphics, simple tiers, foundational grains at the bottom, fats at the top. It looked scientific, official, settled. But nutrition was never that simple. The original pyramid heavily emphasized carbohydrates, bread, rice, pasta as the dietary base. Fats were demonized. Everything was about low-fat, high-grain eating. And for years, that advice shaped school lunches, food marketing, and public perception of what healthy meant. The problem is that dietary guidelines aren't created in a vacuum. Agricultural policy, food industry lobbying, and economic interests all sit at the same table. When grain subsidies are massive, it's not shocking that grains end up foundational. That doesn't mean the pyramid was malicious. It reflected the best consensus of the time, filtered through politics and industry influence. But over time, we learned more about sugar, ultra-processed carbs, metabolic health, and the role of healthy fats. And the simple pyramid started to look oversimplified. Nutrition isn't one size fits all. Activity level, genetics, metabolic health, they all matter. A static triangle couldn't capture that complexity. The food pyramid wasn't entirely wrong. It was just far more confident than science ever should have been. Story 19. Democracy itself is the answer to all our problems. It can solve a lot. Giving people a voice, distributing power, allowing leadership to be replaced without violence, that's a massive upgrade over most of human history. But democracy is a mechanism, not a miracle. It translates public opinion into policy. That's it. And public opinion is shaped by media, education, economic pressure, misinformation, and whoever has the loudest megaphone. If the information ecosystem is distorted, the outcomes will be too. Even if the voting process is technically fair, there's also the issue of incentives. Politicians in democratic systems often optimize for re-election cycles, not long-term stability. Short-term popularity can outweigh structural reform. Necessary but painful decisions get postponed. Complex problems get reduced to slow bins. And then there's participation. Low turnout, gerrymandering, donor influence, all legal within certain frameworks, can skew representation without abolishing democracy outright. The system remains intact, but its outputs drift. I'm not anti-democracy. It's one of the best tools we have for balancing power, but it's a tool. If the culture is polarized, the institutions weak, and the information corrupted, democracy won't magically fix that. It will reflect it. Democracy isn't the answer to everything. It's a framework that amplifies whatever we put into it. Story 20. Billionaires deserve their wealth because they work harder than the people under them. It sounds intuitive. Effort equals reward. Grind harder, earn more. That's the story most of us were raised on, but the math doesn't cooperate. There are only 24 hours in a day. Even if someone works nonstop, no sleep, no breaks, they can't produce thousands of times more labor than the average employee. A billionaire isn't earning 10,000 times a worker's salary because they're exerting 10,000 times the effort. That would require something like 40,000 hours in a single day. What they control isn't time, it's leverage. Ownership of equity, control over capital, systems that scale. When a company grows, the gains flow primarily to shareholders and executives, not proportionally to every worker contributing to that growth. The wealth isn't tied directly to physical or mental exertion. It's tied to position within the structure. That doesn't mean they didn't work hard. Many absolutely did. But hard work alone doesn't explain exponential wealth. Nurses work hard, construction workers work hard, teachers work hard. Effort is common. Billion-dollar equity stakes are not. Extreme wealth isn't a reflection of extreme hours. It's a reflection of ownership, scale, and how the system distributes returns. Story 21. The biggest lie of this century is that you have to do everything and be happy at the same time. It sounds empowering. Be ambitious. Build a career. Maintain the body. Nurture relationships. Travel. Side hustle. Stay informed. Practice gratitude. Sleep 8 hours. Meditate. Smile through it. Somehow, optimize every domain of your life and make it look effortless. The pressure isn't just to succeed anymore, it's to succeed visibly and joyfully. Burnout isn't framed as a structural issue, it's framed as a mindset problem. If you're overwhelmed, maybe you just need better time management, better habits, a better morning routine. But there are only so many hours in a day. Energy is finite, attention is finite, trade-offs are real. Doing everything means something gets diluted, depth becomes breadth, rest becomes guilt, and happiness becomes another performance metric. Something to track and improve. It's not that ambition is bad. It's not that fulfillment across multiple areas is impossible. It's that the expectation of constant optimization ignores human limits. You can build a lot, you can be happy, but trying to max out every category simultaneously isn't balanced. It's exhaustion dressed up as self-actualization. Story 22, Meritocracy. The idea that the best rise to the top and the most capable win. It sounds fair. Reward talent, reward effort. Let outcomes reflect ability. In theory, that's clean, but merit doesn't exist in a vacuum. Access to good schools, stable housing, mentorship, capital, time to experiment, the ability to fail without catastrophic consequences, those who shape who gets to demonstrate merit in the first place. Two people can have equal potential, but wildly different runways. And then there's how we define merit. Test scores, revenue generated, charisma, network strength. A lot of what we call merit is just what the current system happens to reward. Connections get labeled as networking skill. Inherited capital becomes entrepreneurial vision. Confidence, often built from safety, reads as competence. None of this means skill and hard work don't matter. They absolutely do. People build impressive things through discipline and intelligence every day. But pure meritocracy assumes a level playing field. It assumes outcomes map neatly to effort and ability. Reality is messier. Merit influences success. It just doesn't fully determine it. Story 23, the military fights to protect. It can do that. National defense is a real function. Deterrence matters. There are genuine threats in the world, and having a trained force can prevent larger conflicts from reaching home soil. But that's not the full picture. Modern militaries don't operate only in response to imminent invasion. They project power. They secure trade routes. They protect geopolitical interests. They stabilize regions that matter economically or strategically. Sometimes that overlaps with protecting citizens. Sometimes it's about protecting influence. The average soldier may believe they're defending their country, and many genuinely are willing to sacrifice for that idea. But the decisions about where and why to deploy aren't made at their level. They're made by political leadership, often influenced by alliances, defense contractors, energy interests, and global positioning. And then there's the uncomfortable pattern: prolonged conflicts with unclear victories, wars justified by shifting narratives, enemies that seem to regenerate. If the primary goal were simply direct protection of civilians, some interventions would look very different. I'm not dismissing service or sacrifice. Individual troops aren't the architects of policy. Protecting us is a simplified slogan. National defense is real, so is strategic power, and the two aren't always the same thing. Story 24, Fiat currency. The idea that money has value because a government says it does. It sounds fragile when you put it that way. Paper backed by nothing tangible. No gold, no silver, just trust. And that's the key word, trust. Fiat currency works because people collectively believe it works. You accept it for your labor because you believe someone else will accept it for goods. Governments declare it legal tender, central banks manage supply, and the entire system runs on confidence. The upside? Flexibility. Governments can respond to recessions, stimulate economies, and inject liquidity during crises. Under a strict gold standard, that maneuverability is limited. Fiat systems allow expansion when needed, but that flexibility is also the risk. Money can be created, debt can expand, inflation can erode purchasing power quietly over time. The currency in your bank account isn't shrinking numerically, it's shrinking in what it can buy. And most people don't feel it immediately. It's gradual. Fiat isn't fake, it's powerful. It underpins modern global economies, but its value isn't intrinsic, it's institutional. It survives on confidence, policy discipline, and collective belief. And when trust wavers, fiat doesn't collapse instantly. It just slowly buys you less. Story 25. You can be anything you want. It feels empowering. It's the kind of sentence that gets printed on classroom walls and graduation cards. Dream big, work hard, don't limit yourself. But it quietly asks you to ignore money, luck, and timing. Money determines access to education, to safe environments, to time free from survival stress. Someone working 2 jobs doesn't have the same runway to figure it out as someone financially supported while they experiment. Luck is uncomfortable to admit, but it's real. Being born in the right country, meeting the right mentor, entering an industry right before it explodes, avoiding a random illness or accident, you can do everything right and still miss the wave. Timing matters too. Some careers only exist in certain eras. Some markets only reward specific skills at specific moments. Effort doesn't control macro conditions. None of this means ambition is pointless. Hard work increases your odds. Skill compounds. Discipline matters. But you can be anything implies total agency. Reality is probabilistic. You can become a lot more than you think, just not in a vacuum, and not independent of resources, randomness, and when you happen to show up. Story 26. If it's on the internet, it's true. It used to feel that way. Early on, publishing something online felt almost official. Information seemed democratized. If multiple websites said it, it had to be verified, right? But the barrier to publishing online is basically zero. Anyone can post, anyone can edit, anyone can fabricate a screenshot, a statistic, a quote. The internet doesn't filter for truth, it filters for engagement, and engagement rewards speed, emotion, and virality, more than accuracy. A well-designed graphic with a confident tone can feel authoritative even if it's completely false. Repetition makes claims feel familiar. Familiarity feels like truth. And once something spreads, corrections rarely travel as far as the original claim. Search results aren't ranked by truthfulness. They're ranked by relevance, popularity, and optimization. Algorithms amplify what performs, not necessarily what's correct. The internet is an incredible tool for knowledge. You can access research papers, expert analysis, and first-hand accounts instantly. But it's also the largest misinformation engine in human history. Being online doesn't make something true. It just makes it accessible, and sometimes louder. Story 27. Communism works. It can work, at least in theory. A classless society. Shared ownership of production. Resources distributed based on need rather than profit. On paper, it aims to eliminate exploitation and extreme inequality. The appeal is obvious. No billionaire class. No workers scraping by while owners accumulate exponentially. The promise is fairness, structurally built in, but theory and implementation are different. Large-scale centralized control over production requires enormous coordination. In practice, that often concentrates power in the state. And when economic power and political power merge, accountability gets fragile. Historically, that concentration has led to inefficiencies at best and authoritarianism at worst. There's also the incentive question. Without market signals like price and competition, allocating resources efficiently becomes complex. Innovation can slow if rewards are disconnected from output. That doesn't mean people stop caring, but systems matter. At smaller scales, cooperatives, communes, shared ownership models, elements of communism can function well. Context matters. I'm not dismissing the critique it raises about capitalism. Inequality and exploitation are real issues, but it works depends heavily on scale, structure, and human behavior. The vision is equality. The execution has historically been far more complicated. Story 28. The biggest lie of this century is that we are alone. It feels compelling. The universe is incomprehensibly large. Billions of galaxies, trillions of planets. Statistically, the idea that life exists somewhere else doesn't sound crazy at all. But that's different from saying we have confirmed contact or that someone secretly knows everything and is hiding it. There's a huge gap between probability and proof. Yes, governments classify information. Yes, militaries investigate unidentified aerial phenomena. And yes, some footage and reports have been declassified in recent years. But unidentified doesn't automatically mean extraterrestrial. It means unexplained with the current data. It's also important to separate possibility from certainty. Scientists openly search for biosignatures, exoplanets in habitable zones, microbial life in our own solar system. The question of life elsewhere isn't suppressed. It's actively studied. The idea that someone somewhere knows the full truth is powerful because it explains uncertainty. It gives the mystery structure. But extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. We might not be alone in the universe. Statistically, it would be surprising if we were. But believing we are being definitively deceived requires evidence that goes beyond suspicion and intuition. Curiosity is rational. Certainty without proof isn't. Story 29. Our history is the truth. It feels that way. It's printed in textbooks, taught in classrooms, documented in museums. Dates, names, wars, revolutions, all arranged in a clean narrative that makes the present feel inevitable. But history isn't just recorded, it's selected. For every event included, dozens are minimized or omitted. For every figure elevated to hero status, others are reduced to footnotes. The people who win conflicts, control institutions, or shape archives tend to shape the story. That doesn't mean everything we're taught is false. A lot of it is grounded in real documentation and scholarship, but interpretation is unavoidable. Motives get simplified, atrocities get softened. Economic incentives get reframed as moral crusades. History is often less about what happened and more about which version of what happened survives. There are primary sources, sure, but even those are written from perspectives by generals, politicians, elites. The everyday voices rarely dominate the record. And once a narrative solidifies, it becomes identity. Questioning it feels like betrayal instead of inquiry. Our history isn't pure fiction, but it's not neutral either. It's a story shaped by power, memory, and what a society is comfortable admitting about itself. Story 30. That the developed world has created free, civil, and just societies. It can look that way from the outside: strong institutions, rule of law, elections, courts, consumer protections. Compared to much of history, living standards are undeniably higher. But free, civil, and just depend on who you are within those systems. Freedom often exists within economic boundaries. You're free to start a business, if you have capital. Free to speak within social and professional consequences. Free to move if you can afford housing in opportunity-rich areas. Civility is also selective. Internally, laws may protect rights and process. Externally, foreign policy can be far more aggressive. Wealth extracted historically, through colonization, resource control, trade imbalances, helped finance the stability now celebrated as proof of moral superiority. Justice, too, is uneven. Legal equality on paper doesn't erase disparities in access to representation, sentencing patterns, or generational wealth gaps. Institutions can be impartial in structure yet unequal in outcome. None of this means progress hasn't happened. It has. Rights expanded, living conditions improved, Democratic norms strengthened relative to the past. But calling these societies fully free and just ignores the structural inequalities that persist beneath the surface. They may be more stable, they may be more prosperous, but perfection isn't the same as development, and justice isn't evenly experienced.